Hello everybody and welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Group. Today's topic, number 6 on the countdown of the top 10 best practices in contract administration. With that, I do want to hand it over to Douglas and Jim to get started with today's session. So Doug and Jim, over to you.
Well, welcome everybody. We're glad you could join us again in the top 10 best practice countdown for construction contract administration. Doug?
Yeah, everybody, glad to join us and look forward to getting your input and feedback as we go through the presentation today.
So Matthew, if you will, jump right into the next slide after this one. You know, we're plagiarizing Mr. Letterman a little bit here. We're setting up our top 10 best practices, and we'll take a look at the next slide of the what we've covered so far. Best practice number 10 is having fun. You know, it's something to set time in your schedule for, to set aside time to do and be sure that you do it. It's part of why you got in the business of design and construction, probably anyway, is your love for the excitement of the new, and scheduling time for fun is something we shouldn't forget. Best practice number 9, remembering your pants pockets and thinking about the quality control that goes on in the clothing industry, perhaps how little exposure there is with some issue with the production of a pair of pants, but yet we have large projects where some don't have a quality control, quality assurance program in place. So we talked about setting up a QA/QC process in your office and implementing that to be something that always occurs on your jobs, putting it in place. Best practice number 8 was teamwork creates winners, and certainly the opportunity with team is to maximize your strength and minimize your weaknesses, and with a focus on working collaboratively. And best practice number 7, holding costs in check, is a conversation about setting office procedures, using those in your office, sticking with them, following those procedures so that everyone knows the game plan, and things like scoping of projects and a thorough understanding of the services that you are offering is imperative to moving forward in the CA phase. And so today, Matthew, next slide, is best practice number 6. Admitting mistakes is ethically sound. Now, I'll pause here for the disclaimer. Certainly, those that provide you with your professional liability insurance coverage, your attorney friends who help you with your business operations, may not suggest this in quite the same fashion as Doug and I will talk about it. But we have both seen frequently the benefit of stepping forward to admit when you've made a mistake. This again is not something you would do without the thorough knowledge and understanding of those that help you manage your risk. But it certainly is one of our best practices. So let's talk about that a little bit, Matthew, and take a look at the next slide. So you're out in Vegas having a great vacation. You never claim to be the smartest one in your family, and oh my gosh, why in the world would they offer marriage opportunities 24 hours a day in Vegas? I cannot understand. But maybe you made a mistake, maybe it was late, maybe there was drinking involved, I don't know. But what you want to do immediately when you've discovered a mistake is to be there to find the solution and really be involved in figuring out what is the next step. Because let's look at the next slide, Matthew. There are quotes galore for how we need to operate within our lives, and two that are my favorites that come from presidents, and one was Benjamin Franklin, who said honesty is the best policy, and Thomas Jefferson, making a connection to architecture there, and the father of in this country, honesty is the first chapter in the Book of Wisdom. So let's take a look at the next slide. How can you disconnect a project's life from the truth? if you are a professional practitioner who is in the business to stay in the business, who has a love for the practice of construction, of engineering, of architecture, of development, design, and you are truly focused on life, health, safety, and welfare of the general public. How can you separate being honest from how you practice every day in your business? Doug and I agree that those are not two separate things in how you choose to live and how you choose to practice. And what we are taught are the best policies for how we can live our lives. Honesty is paramount. And Doug, I'll pause there and see if there's anything that you want to add.
Not at this point, Jim. We're in agreement, so I don't want to take the time to just repeat what you've said already.
Okay. Well, Matthew, let's go to the next slide and see if there are any questions out there so far.
No, at this point it is still pretty quiet from the audience.
Okay. Well, one of the first things that we wanted to throw in and share in an opportunity of acting honestly is perhaps from the very beginning of a project, the avoidance of disputes. We have talked many times over the years in these webinars about dispute management, and in fact, there has been so much information written and gathered about how to resolve claims that this phrase of claims avoidance has been coined and now is commonplace in conversations about management of projects. And so in the process of setting up the projects to begin work in the field, we are familiar with pre-construction conferences and setting up the administrative understanding and administrative duties at the beginning of a project. One of those things that often is the topic of conversation in those meetings is how we move through change and how we deal with that on a project. Certainly it's important to understand and accept the fact that claims are going to be a part of construction and that they will occur on your project. In fact, I credit Doug with pointing this out in previous webinars that we've had, that ours, in fact, is maybe a unique industry in that our contracts are established around the assumption that mistakes will occur. Maybe in other industries, those contracts don't have provisions that are so clear for how we deal with mistakes that are made on jobs. And so in the process that you establish with your team, certainly what you want to do early in the job before there are mistakes that are apparent or disagreements that have to be undertaken and discussed is exactly how you plan to handle those situations. And our experience has said that when you professionally establish a platform of honesty and transparency, that you're off to perhaps the best start you can have in these early phases of the project, so that you create an atmosphere where you work as a team and you're collaborative in solutions rather than adversarial. Doug, I'll hush for a minute.
Jim and I have often talked about, managing expectations. And one huge expectation that you need to sit down and talk to your client about early on is what the standard of care is for you as a professional architect. And it is not perfection. And so you need to help your clients understand, educate them so that they will understand that there's no such thing as a perfect set of drawings. They're not going to get a perfect set of drawings. There's going to be errors, there's going to be omissions, there's going to be mistakes, and you plan for that. And Jim was talking about setting up and accepting that claims are a part of construction, mistakes and errors and omissions are a part as well. And so you plan for those things. You have a plan in place so that when they happen, you can deal with them effectively and efficiently and not get into an adversarial situation. And that's the reason why we have contingencies set up in project budgets. So those contingencies are there to handle those errors and omissions and items like that. They are not, and again, you need to get with your clients to make sure they understand that's not an extra pot of money that's sitting over there for the owner to use to make design changes once construction starts. Oftentimes I'm seeing where that happens. The owner says, well, that's contingency, that's mine, I can do what I want to with it, and may want to spend it, and then an error or an omission comes up, and then he's going to turn around and say, well, Mr. Architect, you should be paying for that. So you just need to educate your clients and make sure that they're clear and have an understanding that there's going to be errors, there's going to be omissions, there's going to be conflicts, there's going to be change orders, and get everybody on the same page as how you're going to handle those things. And that goes a long way towards resolving claims and avoiding disputes without having to go through the legal process. Matthew, do we have anything from the audience?
Nothing yet. There's just the one mention is, Doug, on your end, there seems to be a high-pitched noise, and we're not sure if it's just maybe feedback in the system or if there is noise from your location. But no questions or comments related to the topic at the moment.
Okay, I am not hearing it on my end, so I don't know what it might be.
Yeah, no problem.
It may be your liability insurance carrier trying to jam your signal. From let's go to the next slide, Matthew. I'm going to use some pretty graphic images here with folks to try to drive home a point about what our expectation is, maybe when we're not at the center of the issue, but others are. And, the question about whether or not honesty is what we expect from professionals, from other professionals, well, of course it is. And I want you to be patient with me. I'm going to be politically fair. So let's go to the next slide. So, I think I have watched my peers often struggle with this issue of coming forward first. And, I think that, again, from our experience, mine and Doug's, that when you deal with issues directly, when you do that thoroughly, and I think you can apply this to instances outside of the practice of architecture or engineering or construction in your lives, when you deal thoroughly and in a timely manner with anything that is of issue, then you begin the process of healing and correction as quickly as you can and as collaboratively as you can. You wouldn't walk onto a job site, I would hope, and see this activity that you see on the screen here and not step forward to take some action. With our licensure of a requirement of looking after health, safety, and welfare, my friend David here needs to get off that platform and get himself the right equipment to be working at the elevation he is. So there are also then, as with this photograph and this job site, concerns with liability. We learned that as a comparison. Job site safety is not our prerogative to control. That lies within the general contractor's purview. But there are actions that we need to take should we see something that's dangerous. I feel that applies to concerns of mistakes as well. So you certainly, as you look at an issue on a project, review that with your liability insurance carriers, as I said, with your legal team, your advisors. Involve them immediately and early. Your agreements with them are very clear in what's required as notifications. I was in a seminar just last week where a liability insurance carrier told a story of a firm that was heartbreaking in that they were involved in an issue. They knew they were involved in the issue. They weren't trying to hide the issue from the insurance carrier, but it had not formalized. They knew that something had occurred on a job that they may have some involvement with, but again, they hadn't been formally brought into the issue. And so when their insurance carrier went through the renewal process and asked them if there were any pending claims, they honestly thought they were answering honestly and said no, they weren't involved. And then when the issue did occur, the insurance company did not provide them coverage because they had, in fact, been notified because they had been in conversations about the issue, but had not been brought into the issue legally, in their opinion. So it's very specific what we need to do should we find ourselves in a situation where we have made a mistake. And again, I'm not suggesting that you do otherwise than to involve all the appropriate folks within your firm immediately. But this is a bigger conversation about the history of organizations who have said, yes, that's our mistake, and what has occurred with them over time. So it's not a time to turn your back on a problem. It's not a time to hope that things will just work out and they will self-correct. In fact, it's our job, it's our obligation by contract to do the opposite. So let's take a look at the next slide, Matthew, and see if there are any questions.
Yeah,
Matthew, as you're going to the next slide, I'm going to piggyback on Jim's comment a little bit there about the insurance carrier. Most, if not all, professional liability insurance policies for our profession have a clause in there that requires you to notify the carrier as soon as you are aware that a claim, you may be involved in a claim. And that doesn't mean when you filed the complaint, it's when you were aware that there's an issue prior to them filing a complaint against you. So as soon as you suspect that something might happen to where you could be liable, you should be notifying your insurance carrier. Now, a lot of people have asked me over the years, well, isn't that going to hurt me when I go to renew my policy for the next year that I've reported all these instances? That does not get held against you. You can report and should report every instance, and provided that instance doesn't turn into a claim, you reporting that instance is not going to be held against you, and it's not going to make your rates go up for the next year. So as Jim said in the story he told, and I've heard similar stories where the design professional failed to notify the insurance carrier in a timely manner, and the insurance carrier goes back to that clause in the contract and will not provide coverage. And that's a very simple thing that we should do and can do to make sure that we are protecting ourselves, and all those premiums that we're paying are actually going to work for us, is to make sure that you report any instance in a timely manner. And Matthew, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, no, no problem. I also just had a comment and a question, or I guess two comments here before we moved on to the next slide. So from Mark, he indicated not a question per se, but just an overall statement. But even though you have contracts that provide for claim and conflict resolution and to promote honesty to extent that mistakes, errors, etc. Will be dealt with in a professional fashion, the honest quality starts within the culture of the company from the leadership down. So, comment there from Mark. And then additionally, before I wait for Douglas and Jim to respond, kind of a fun comment here from Eric saying that photo looks like an oh shoot moment. I guess I will edit out what I think he's going to use. You let him get down because it isn't safe, and he falls while getting down is a bad scenario you can imagine here.
It was absolutely, and it was not a oh shoot. You're absolutely right. It was a scary situation that was just a little bit ridiculous. And one of those things that we see, I won't go far here, but it was, hey, I just got this one last thing to do. You know, we've demobilized all the stuff we would typically use. We just were going to get up here just for a minute and knock this one little piece across the bottom of this beam out, shoot it, and go home. And gosh, I got to tell you, I think that's when most of the accidents happen. But anyway, yeah, it was an oh shoot moment, all right. Matthew, what was the say? Well, yep, that's right. Stay right there. But tell me, what was the first? The first was just a statement, not a question, right?
Yes, correct. Mark had a comment just saying that while he agreed with everything you're saying, the best place essentially to start quality is to start with good leadership and culture within the firm itself.
Absolutely right. I can share with you just one story, and Doug, please do the same. I was working for a firm as an employee at the time. We had a situation on a project that was with an owner who was a reasonable owner, but didn't have lots of money laying around to cover unforeseen circumstances. We went to a board meeting to explain to the school board what the situation was on the job. The gentleman that owned the company made the presentation, and the first words out of his mouth were, "This is our fault." And then he explained the situation and explained what the remedy was and asked for the school board's approval, and they gave it. And we were getting ready to leave, and the board asked us to step outside. We went outside thinking that perhaps we're getting ready to get fired. We came back inside, and they said, "We had not told you this, but we were considering doing another school on the other side of our county. Would you be interested in having that job?" And of course we said yes. And their answer was, so the owner said, "Well, what made you do that tonight?" And the chairman of the school board said, "This is the first time in my career that I have ever had someone come in and without explanation accept responsibility for something they did. I believe that to be of character, and that's the kind of people this county wants to work with." So that may be an odd story. It may not be. It's the truth. And it was just a great example to me of how admitting to our mistakes is so critically important. You know, Doug and I talk about this all the time. We have let, I believe, others influence our judgment, perhaps not in the best of ways, to be afraid more than to be supportive of taking that kind of action. And I'm not sure that that owner had notified our carrier. I'm not sure that he had done what he was supposed to do, but I think it worked out to be in his favor. Well, we're taking a look here at our good friend Abe Lincoln, who talked about honesty. And sorry, I got hung up on the presidents as we were working through this presentation. But we in our contract documents, if we're using, for example, and I use the example here in Doug's research, AIA A201. One of our responsibilities is in the interpretation of documents and how we decide matters that are under contract related to those documents, and how interpretations and decisions are made as we work through the life of the project. And one of those requirements within those interpretations and discussions is that we do not show partiality. And I think this is another shining example of the word honesty, maybe spelled out in a different way, that as we are making those decisions, we are not supposed to be leaning toward the owner nor leaning toward the contractor, but in the middle where the honest ground is. And I don't know, Doug, if you want to add to that.
No, Jim, I think that's pretty clear. It kind of puts us in a odd situation as the owner is paying us and we are representing the owner. But when it comes to when you step into that role of initial decision maker, then you've got to put that aside and act impartially and not favor the owner, the one that's paying you. I would also note that at least in North Carolina, the licensing laws has a similar requirement. Our licensing laws has a similar language in the law about us acting impartially when handling disputes between owners and contractors.
I'd be interested, Matthew, if anybody raises their hand to, first of all, if we have any questions, but if there are any others that have similar situations in their states or would like to add any story about what they may have experienced in a similar fashion about impartiality. And while you're looking, we can go to the next slide. It'll be a quick one.
Sure. Oh, wait, there is a comment here as you have the next slide coming on from Aparna. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Saying, I'm self-employed right now, but all along my job tenure, I was told to never admit that we were wrong because it can be held against the firm and can trigger legal proceedings. So.
So do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm not surprised to hear that. I think you will probably get that advice from most insurance carriers and probably from most attorneys. Having practiced law for a while, I can't say that I probably wouldn't give the same advice to a client, but there's a caveat, and there's a point when you need to step up to the plate and take responsibility for your actions. And if you know that you are in the wrong, delaying that admission is not going to make the situation any better. If you're not sure, then certainly I would not admit that I was wrong when I wasn't 100% sure I was wrong. But if I'm wrong, while I may not immediately volunteer and step up and say right away, raise my hand here, I did it, it's my error. After contemplation and understanding what the consequences are and knowing, getting a full understanding of the issue and whether or not it's some kind of a shared responsibility, if I'm in the wrong, I'm not going to try to deny it. And I guess I'm trying to distinguish between denying or lying about an issue versus stepping up to the plate and saying that and taking responsibility for an error that you made. So if you can kind of understand and just get that distinction, and maybe you can kind of understand the point I'm trying to make. So you need to, in my opinion, and this is not legal advice to anyone, but in my opinion, if you know that you were in error, I think it's better for you to step up to the plate and take the responsibility for it sooner rather than trying to hide it and cover it up or deny it or lie about it. And chances are you're going to end up being found responsible for it at some point down the road anyway. I hope that makes sense. Jim?
Absolutely, Doug. The important part there is that it's a known mistake, as Doug described. We're talking about things here where you realize that something is amiss, that and you do know that you have involvement in that. It's not necessarily something that you're unsure of, as Doug described. These would be cases where you've made a mistake and you know it to be your mistake and it's clear. And I agree with Doug 100%. I'm not surprised. And frequently, and it's sort of why we titled this like we did, most of those professions that protect us don't want this to be something that's on the record as admitting that it was our fault, because there are, more often than not, settlements that are worked out in issues that cost money, and admissions like this can affect how those settlements are able to move forward. So none of this you should do without talking to your liability insurance people, but and your legal advisors, your attorneys and lawyers that help you. But it's just too much of an important issue for us not to spend a good deal of time talking about. And I'll go back to the slide and say, so I was trying to be politically balanced. We had Clinton, we got Nixon. But when people stepped up and admitted they were wrong, then were they better off? Weren't they better off? What did you expect? What did you think of them before they admitted their mistake and after they admitted their mistake? It may have been different. Let's take a look at the next slide, Matthew.
So, Jim, again, I think there is a big difference between denying something and admitting that you were wrong. Now, if an event happens and you're working through some issues and maybe it's some kind of a shared responsibility, you may not automatically jump up and say, that's my fault, I'm going to take care of it. You can work through and resolve the issue, and especially if it's some kind of a shared issue, and get it resolved. But if you know that you have some responsibility in it, your first response shouldn't be to deny and lie and say, no, that I didn't do anything wrong. So I'm trying to emphasize that when we're talking about honesty here, we're saying that you need to be honest, but I think you also need to, as Jim said, confer with your carrier and your attorney. And certainly, especially if it's a major issue, advise them that, yeah, this is my fault. I want to step up and take responsibility for it, and let them know your stance on that, and step up to the plate and take that responsibility. Lying about it, denying it, I think is the worst thing that you can do. And I think when these carriers and attorneys tell you not to admit to something, again, not knowing the total facts and circumstances around it, what they're trying to do is protect you, and they don't want you to admit to something when it may not be your fault, or they may be able to show that there are mitigating circumstances. And as Jim said, when you get into negotiations about settlements, having an admission on the record makes it difficult for them to negotiate a more favorable settlement. So it's again, it's not. The point is to not lie and not be deceitful about it. So Matthew, let's move on.
I have a couple of comments and questions here. I think, if possible, I'll see on this slide here. First one is a good quote from a non-president, since we're presidential on these slides. Favorite quote from Sean Connery in Rising Sun: "Fix the problem, not the blame." Comes in from Edwin. We have a comment or a question here, actually, Faisal or Faisal. Again, I apologize for not pronouncing people's names correctly here. Faisal has been in situations where clients have been told truth, but they have preferred to be quiet versus speaking out to contractors. What should be done in those situations?
If I understand right, she's saying that the client is being told the truth, but the contractor is not being brought into that circle of communication.
That is how I read the question as well, yes.
And again, as long as you are not, and I think you need to be truthful and honest with contractors too, if you're not being deceitful, I don't necessarily have an issue with withholding an admission of liability. But again, I don't think that you should tell the owner, yeah, it's my fault, and then turn around and tell the contractor, no, it's your fault. So you need to be honest, and you need to be honest with all parties. I also don't have an issue with going to the owner and saying, it's my fault, and then not admitting that to the contractor as you're trying to work through and resolve what the issue is.
It's an interesting conundrum because you're first obligated to be impartial, contractually perhaps obligated to be impartial in performing your role. And if you have tried to work this job as a team, it certainly would be disappointing to not share the game plan, as it were, with the whole team. So when the contractor is allowed to know that information, it's certainly going to change the relationship. That's a tough one. I think I would spend some time trying to, with my owner, help them understand that maybe, this, or my client, that this is not the best way to proceed. But I certainly can see that they would disagree with that.
A quick story. I was on a project one time where it had its typical issues between the owner, contractor, and architect. And we got to a point in the project where the light fixtures were going in, and the owner had, during the design, told the architect, and it was in the program, I want this type of light fixture. That type of fixture did not get in the documents, so that was an error on the part of the architect. The fixtures had been installed, and it came up during the meeting, and after the meeting, the contractor came up to me, and we discussed it, and he said, Doug, let me check on some things. I think I can get the owner what he wants without having to replace all these light fixtures throughout the whole building. And he stepped forward and helped us out of the situation. He was able to do so, and it was the type of lamp that was going in the fixture that was more the concern with the owner than the style or look of the fixture. and it was an energy efficiency concern. And so the electrical contractor found an adapter that would allow these fixtures to remain in place and accept the type of lamps that the owner wanted. And he didn't have to do that. And it's my belief that he did that because of the way we as a design firm treated the contractors throughout that process of that project. Like I said, it had its issues, and we worked through them, and we were straightforward and honest with everybody, and didn't try to take advantage of anyone in any of those situations that came up. And when it came our turn to be on the hot seat, then that contractor stepped up and helped us out. So I think that's another one of the points that we're trying to make about being honest, is that you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. That's another one of these quotes that we can throw in here. And I think it does pay dividends, and that's just a quick story to show an example where it did for us.
Matthew, this is all right along with the next slide. Let's keep doing the questions, but throw that next slide up there, and it sort of underlines what Doug is saying. But go ahead with the next question.
All right, we have two comments that came in again from Edwin, I think, that help out with the conversation. One, talking about the slippery slope and defining the difference between honesty versus disclosure. So that's a big one to think about, and I'll let you comment on that. But also then he said, it's about all you know, or all you know is all that you know, not necessarily all that will be known. So again, a reminder in that sense, related to both the team and the individual. And then we have two other comments in here from Art. Art says, I've had a CEO call me into his office and tell me that he wanted to be aware that, or wanted me to be aware that his organization was paying my firm, and he was implying that I should be on the CEO's side when making decisions regarding change orders. I told him that my integrity would not be compromised and that I would be impartial in all matters regarding the project, and took offense if he was implying otherwise.
That was a fun conversation to have, I'm sure, with your client. But it's exactly along the lines of what we're talking about here. Kudos to you for standing up to that kind of a conversation, because I think I know you did the right thing. But sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Nope, that was the last of the comments we had in the session right now.
Well, this slide goes to support exactly what Doug was saying, that you can't forget how you feel about those in your past. Apply it to everything. Everything that has occurred in your past, where whoever it was, whether you were involved with it or watching as an observer, whoever stepped up and accepted that responsibility, and how you felt about them. And just as importantly, when someone gave you their word and then didn't keep up with that and didn't keep their word, how did you feel about them? I'm always looking at the team that I'm working with. I'm always trying to be fair and impartial, but for sure, whenever something is occurring that I don't know how to handle, or could be a mistake, or maybe an issue, or could be something coming down the road, I turn to them. And it's always been a positive thing to look back at the team, and I include the contractor and the client in that definition of team, because they certainly are there to help. I know Doug has had this same experience, but going to a job site, going into a construction trailer, saying, "Hey, this was my mistake, and I'm sorry," and having the beam of light that lights up a superintendent's face to say, "I've been in this business 40 years, and I've been waiting for one of you guys to come in here and say you made a mistake." the rest of that job will be completely different. And I think it just goes to show how important it is to everyone. So let's take a look at the next slide, Matthew, and we take any questions that came up. It really does often come down to those relationships on the site. Absolutely, teamwork is important and it matters, and honesty affects that team with all of you, us, the designers, the contractors, and the owners focused on the quality of construction during the progress of the job. Everyone wins in that regard, and what a great way to reach that quality by being straightforward and honest and sharing your knowledge and what you know. And that comes with strong communication skills, and that leads to opportunities on the job for timeliness. It makes for great collaboration, and as those things combine with honesty, it certainly allows compliance with the contract documents. And I just see all of those as connected building blocks to the best jobs that in my career I've been associated with. They contained all these components. And the team was honest, and they were impartial and fair, and we were tolerant of one another. We allowed latitude between parties, and when people needed to be stronger or needed to lay back, that worked into the life of the project as well. And I have to say that those jobs are the ones that you sit and think about what you were hoping to have happen when you got into this profession, and how all of that added together to make for great projects. Doug, do you have anything to add there, or Matthew, any comments or questions?
I don't have anything, Matthew.
There was one long comment here. I'm just making sure, from Daniel. Saying several years ago, an issue on a school project involving a re-roofing over an existing auditorium. The roof tie-in was properly closed at the end of the day. An overnight storm blew off a portion of the roof, and water ruined an expensive grand piano in the building below. The school official told the insurance company it was an act of God. The insurance company did not pay for a new piano, based on stating that God created the problem. And thus they were, I think it's not supposed to be God there, based on stating that the construction created the problem, and thus they were not liable to pay restitution to the owner. It seems to me that all acts of nature are quote-unquote acts of God. Insurance companies should be held to the same ethical standards. Is that right? In my opinion, everyone was acting honestly except the insurance company. So I'll let you decide if you want to comment on that or not.
I'll comment on that. I think that is right. But what we need to understand is that insurance companies are in the business to make money. They are not in the business to pay out claims. So they will do everything they can to avoid paying a claim or to reduce the amount that they have to pay when they do have to pay a claim. I agree with the comment that they should be fair and honest as well, but unfortunately, not everyone operates the way that they necessarily should. Having practiced law for a while and dealt with insurance companies and trying to get claims settled, I can tell you, as far as stepping up to the plate, it's rare. It does happen, but it's rare.
Yeah, I agree. We could tell stories for a long time here about how rare that is for them to, and I don't mean to be speaking badly of anyone on the phone that's related to an insurance company, but it does seem that there's a lot more effort put into protection of that money than there is in trying to find out what really happened and cover what everybody thought they had coverage for. Matthew, was there another one?
And Jim, just real quick, in their defense, since I did jump on them a little bit, they also have to protect against folks that are filing false claims, and they get a lot of that.
Yeah,
and
true.
I think that has something to do with their resistance to pay when they should, because they don't know whether it's a false claim or not to begin with, and they get hit with that quite a bit.
That's true. Matthew?
All right, just one last comment then was here is everyone makes mistakes. You only differentiate yourself by how you manage them.
There you go. Well said. Well said. Well, let's go to the next slide then, if there aren't any other questions or comments, and sort of touch on these things that I hope may generate some conversation. But how do we've talked about a good way to operate, which is a core of honest action. So how do we do that? Well, what's the way that we put that together as a CA representative to pull this off? Well, we need to be a representative team player and realize, what role we play as that impartial party, as was just stated. When we have to have those difficult conversations with our client or the owner, then we have to do that. But we represent a whole group in the process of this phase of architecture, and not just our own interests. And you've got to have good communication skills. It's as we have discussed, something that has to be very thoughtful and deliberate and cautious when you're explaining how you have made a mistake. Certainly, if we have good communication skills, we may be able to avoid mistakes, or, as Doug described in the light fixture story, lead to a resolution of a mistake that satisfies and suits everyone. One of the things that we also talk about are the contracts. If I could see your hands, I'd be interested in everyone raising their hand that has had a copy of the owner-designer contract that your firm has signed, so that you know what your obligations are on the project. I believe it to be fairly infrequent that contract makes its way into the construction administrator's hands. And gosh, how can you do the right job if you don't know what your firm's contracted to do? And as importantly, what is the contractor obligated to your client to do? And how can we not have copies of that and do the best job that we can do in the field? So I advise individuals, redact what you need to. If the firm doesn't want everyone knowing the fee, or if there's other information in there that perhaps is something that can't be shared, take it out. But let me have what it is that both of us are supposed to do to meet our contractual obligation. Because then you're best informed and you can act honestly and move the project forward. Knowing your forms, knowing what's required by your client, whether it's a state ownership, owned by a state, by a federal organization or local, what's the contract law that's associated with those in your general conditions, and what's referenced there, so that you know in the area you're working, the platform, the set of rules that you're playing by. And certainly, you need to have a working knowledge, at least, of construction means and methods and materials. We're always reminded that those are not our obligation, but certainly to understand how they go together, how they're supposed to be stored and how they're supposed to be installed, will inform you and help you to act honestly on the job. And when you don't know, take the opportunity to learn. The people that are the professionals in the field can't wait to share that knowledge. At least that's been my experience. And understanding the codes and regulations where you work is an important piece of this opportunity to provide good, honest service to your client, and knowing what the regulations are where you're performing your project, especially for those firms that do work in states, jurisdictions that are not where you live, and being sure that you're meeting the requirements of those areas. And in the end, being open-minded and honest, fair, and impartial is, as Doug and I have talked about today, the best of foundations, we believe, to build your practice on. Doug, do you have items to add to that?
No, I think that covers it pretty well.
Matthew, any hands raised or questions about that sequence before we go to the next slide?
Just a comment from Kenneth, saying that not often as he would like, but would prefer a copy of the contracts. And then going off of that, Brian indicates that their firm requires that the CA on the project review the contract prior to anybody signing it.
Wow. Who was that? I want to work there.
Everybody go talk to Brian Leonard about where he's working.
Holy smoke. That's good stuff, man. That's the way it ought to be. What a great way to operate a firm. Well, if there aren't any other comments, Matthew, you want to go to the last slide? So our next gathering, we're going to talk about best practice number 5, which is looking at and using the documents, as strange as that may sound. And we'll do that on May the 24th. I'll go ahead and say thank you so much for being here and participating and sharing your ideas, and I'll stop and let Doug and Matthew close us. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, and we look forward to getting together again next month. Matthew, you can close us out.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. We are right at the time, so I do thank everybody for attending. As a reminder, the session is recorded and will be posted to the YouTube channel probably later this afternoon. I do have to take an extended lunch break to go do my civic duty and vote, as I live in Pennsylvania and we have our primaries today. But if you did want to see this session, again, it'll be posted to youtube.com/CSIConstruction later this afternoon. Additionally, for those that are still on the call, there is the feature in the GoToWebinar to have the handout section. If you see that, or go up to the options or view section to choose handouts, I did upload today's slides as a PDF, so feel free to download that before you log out here today. And then lastly, again, thanks to Doug and Jim for this session. Let everyone know, as you see on the screen here, we will be meeting May 24th for the next session, but then I did confirm with Douglas and Jim, we will do our annual summer off as everybody has vacation time. We also want to let our speakers have some vacation time as well. So with that, after May, we will be stepping away for the month of June and July, and then picking back up with number 4, number 3, number 2, and number 1 to wrap out this year, starting back probably in August. So look for those meeting invites in the near future. Keep an eye on some other interesting information that will be coming out to you all, probably with the contract admin practice group. And again, we appreciate you all in attending and for joining in with the conversations and comments today. With that, feel free to disconnect and have a good rest of your Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.